We all know that the perfect length of a podcast is as long as it needs to be and not a minute more. We kind of throw that around as content creators, but as a listener, when you look at a podcast, what is your favorite time range? I asked you that question, and man, did I have fun hearing your answers. And after you hear them, you're going to go, of course, that's the answer. With a quick tangent, if you're looking to lose weight, I've got a resource for that I'm working on. And just a gentle reminder that life is short. Hit it, ladies.
The School of Podcasting with Dave Jackson.
Podcasting since 2005. I am your award-winning Hall of Fame podcast coach, Dave Jackson. Thanking you so much for tuning in. If you're new to the show, this is where I help you plan, launch, and grow your podcast. If you want to monetize, I can help with that as well. Today, we're talking about how long should my podcast be, or we're going to flip it. How long does it need to be before it starts to turn people off? Because it's question of the month time. Now, if you want to join my happy crew of brilliant podcasting minds, it's super simple. Go to schoolofpodcasting.com/listener. That'll save you on either a monthly or yearly subscription. And of course, it comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So, we all know that the perfect length of a podcast is as long as it needs to be and not a minute more. We get that. And this came from Mark Vignette. He was like, what is the length that when you see it, you either go, ooh, awesome, that's my favorite length, or that's a little too long, or that's a little too short. What works for you? Because we realize it's going to be all over the map. So he wanted to know, what do the listeners of the School of Podcasting want? And here's what you said.
Hello, Dave. This is Brandon B. in Dallas. And, well, I don't have a podcast yet, but I'm working on a few ideas, so maybe soon. In the meantime, here is my answer to the question of the month for April. To be honest, it depends on the topic and the time I have to fill. For example, on my morning commute, I can usually catch up on a few episodes of the Before Breakfast podcast, which runs about 6 minutes per episode, before I reach the highway. At that point, I switch to the Soft Skills Engineering podcast, about half an hour per episode, and 2 of those get me the rest of the way to work. Both of these shows really help me get into the right frame of mind for the day ahead. To wind down on the way home, on the other hand, I'll fire up an episode of The Jordan Harbinger Show or What Was That Like? These are much longer, of course, and I can get through a full episode of either if I skip the ads. When I go grocery shopping in the evening, well, you usually come with me, Dave, because that's when I can get in an episode of the School of Podcasting. Though if it's a short trip, I am more likely to binge on the back catalog of the Podcast Rodeo Show. How long is too long? For me, it's anything over 2 hours, which is about how long it takes for me to mow the lawn. I like to start an episode, slip the phone into my pocket, and not have to fiddle with it until I'm done. As much as I love listening to Dan Carlin, I always hesitate before starting a new episode of Hardcore History because I know I'm going to forget what he was talking about if I ever have to take a break. There you have it. Thanks, Dave, for all you do to help all of us aspiring podcasters out there.
Brandon, thank you so much. And it's kind of interesting. I haven't heard these yet. And I'm not surprised that the answer, because it's a question about podcasting, is it depends. Because every answer, if it's around podcasting, is it kind of depends.
Hey, what's happening, Dave Jackson? This is Chris from Podcastic Audio. You can find me at podcasticaudio.com. What is an ideal length for a podcast? Well, that just depends on how you're going to listen to it, what you want to get out of it, and what you happen to be doing while you're listening to the episode. You see, for me, I prefer my episodes to be somewhere around the 1 hour mark. Now, some might say that's too long, but for me, it's just right. Because while I'm at work for my regular job, you see, I'm a driver. While I'm driving, say, distances that take probably an hour or so to get there, I like to press play on a single episode and enjoy it for my entire commute. I don't have to stop what I'm doing. In fact, we're not even allowed to use our phone or look at our phone or touch our phone while we're operating the vehicle at work. So I'm actually not doing that wink, wink But anyways, yeah, so you want to make sure I can play the entire episode in one shot, start to finish, when I arrive. That's why I prefer my episodes to be right around an hour in length.
Thank you, Chris. I am giggling that you said it depends because, well, again, podcasting.
Hi, Dave. This is York from Welcome to Earth Stories, an original sci-fi audio experience. These are short stories that delves into a little bit of social commentary, a little bit of sci-fi, and definitely rooted into reality. What makes this show a little bit different from other sci-fi shows is that it's not just an audio drama with a whole bunch of sound effects, but rather at the end of every episode, I break it down and I tell you what you could get out of this fable, this story, how this story could impact your life and make you a more compassionate earthling. So check it out at welcometoearthstories.com. As for the length of a podcast, I think it's vital that your listeners, they have an idea of roughly how long the show is. Besides editing my show, producing it, I also produce and edit other people's podcasts. There's this one show that I was working on, and this show is normally about 20 minutes long. When I got the raw audio from the host, it turned out to be about an hour long. 1 hour. I mean, again, her audience is used to hearing a 20-minute long episode. I reached out to her and I said, we got a problem here. Your episodes are usually 20 minutes long. And so that's what your audience is expecting of you. But now this one is a whole hour. We got some explaining to do. So I said that you could explain it to your audience, like right at the beginning of the show. You could say, hey, my fellow listener, I know that you're expecting a 20-minute episode and this is a whole hour, but this is a really good hour because I have a really good guest. Or you could break it down by dividing that 1 hour episode into 2 episodes. And so what I did is I sliced it in half. And I think it's better because of that. I think you just have to know what your audience is expecting. If they're expecting a 1 hour episode, then give them that. If it's way under 1 hour, then you got some explaining to do. Thanks, Dave, for the question of the month. And please check out my podcast, Welcome to Earth Stories, at welcometoearthstories.com.
Thank you, York.
Paul here from Pass ACLS Tip of the Day, a podcast for medical professionals preparing to take their advanced cardiovascular life support class. In 3 to 9 minutes daily, I cover one of the core ACLS topics that students need to know to pass their written exam and megacode. Links to my show's feed, other medical podcasts, and instructions for listening on an Amazon Voice device can be found at passacls.com. Mark's question is one that I literally think about pretty much every day. Because I listen to podcasts primarily while driving to and from work, I usually choose to subscribe to shows and add episodes to my queue that are less than 30 minutes. 15 to 20 minutes is ideal based on my average commute. There are a few shows with longer episodes to which I subscribe, but those shows are usually held in an alternate queue until I have a long trip and can listen to an entire episode without pausing. Thanks for this month's question, Mark. And to Dave for everything you do to help us be better podcasters.
Oh, I love my audience. This is really making me think.
Hey, Dave, it's Todd the Gator here with Guardian Downcast and the Destiny Help Desk podcast. I'm here to answer your question of the month about what I think is the ideal length of a typical podcast. I listen to several different kinds of podcasts, from entertainment to podcasting to YouTube, and even fellow Destiny podcasts out there. And the one thing that I believe holds true, to me at least, is that a typical length of a show depends. On what that is? Well, it differs whether it's a variety show with several segments or strictly informational like a podcast about podcasting or YouTube. If it's entertainment-based or segment-based like I mentioned above, then I think the audience will tell you indirectly by their engagement rates and listen time before they fall off and listen to something else. It goes back to that quote you always speak of, "There's never too long a podcast, just too boring." Well, I think that's how it goes anyway. But if it's based on delivering information or teaching, it again depends. I'm sure some topics you cover require more time to explain than others, but if you're going to hold my feet to the fire, then I usually expect an hour on an informational podcast and up to 2 hours on an entertainment-based podcast. But I've listened to entertainment podcasts that last 25 minutes and I leave satisfied. I think the podcaster has to evaluate their mission and decide what kind of value to pass on and how long you think that needs to take. I'll give you an example. Our entertainment and gaming, news and discussion podcast, Guardian Downcast, has several segments. While we try to trim and edit for time, we average about 3 hours with our weekly show. Now, my solo podcast, Destiny Help Desk, is more about delivering information about a certain topic in the game Destiny to help new players understand the complex elements of the game, and it usually averages 20 to 35 minutes. 2 totally different podcasts with 2 different missions. And as I look at our gigantic 3-hour podcast stats, I find that 90% of our listeners stay to the end. Full disclosure, I have special sound clips that I insert after the end music for our diehard listeners out there. Now I can hear your audience grumbling. You'll never have success with a 3-hour podcast. Well, I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but we have a thriving Discord community, and our Patreon is growing every day as well. So I think they would tell you different. I'm sorry, that comes across as glib, but I've been blown away. I even know of a gaming podcast that goes over 5 hours. That's a little too long for me, but hundreds of people tune into their show live, not to mention whatever downloads they get in post-production. So the answer for me is, it depends. And I also think that what was once the standard for showtime is kind of changing with the times. Sorry, no pun intended. Sorry to drag this out, Dave, but it's been a source of frustration for me trying to determine the ideal length of a show. But just know your audience will tell you what's too long and if they want more. Again, my podcasts are Guardian Downcast and the Destiny Help Desk. And I also have a YouTube channel, Todd the Gator. That's 2 Ds and G-A-T-R. Thanks for all you do, Dave. And I'll look forward to your next show on Monday. As I close out our show, I usually say this phrase: continue to be safe, everybody. And more importantly, take care of one another. Life's too damn short. Thank you all so very much for listening. And later, Guardian.
Oh, this is too funny. Yes, it does depend. And it's really interesting on getting insights. And I'll have a little tale on life being short here towards the end of the show.
This is Kim Newlove from the Pharmacists Voice podcast, which you can find at thepharmacistvoice.com. When I pick a podcast, the perfect length is 8 to 17 minutes at 1.0 speed. That's the perfect length for me as an individual because I do a lot of housework. I can empty the dishwasher in about 10 minutes. I can wash all the morning dishes in about another 10 minutes. It probably takes me an hour to fold laundry. In that case, I can get through a lot of small podcasts or one large podcast. It just kind of depends. But in general, when I scroll down my list and I see a podcast that's 8 to 17 minutes in length, I go for that one first. Again, my name is Kim Newlove. I am the host of the Pharmacist Voice podcast, which you can find at thepharmacistvoice.com. I am a pharmacist by training, but I'm not in clinical practice anymore. I made a career transition to voice actor and podcast host. Among other things, I narrate audiobooks for women pharmacist authors, provide medical narration to clients in the pharmaceutical, biotech, and continuing medical education industries, and I narrate content for explainer videos and e-learning projects. I was inspired by my nonverbal son who has autism to combine my background as a pharmacist with my speaking voice and launch my business, The Pharmacist's Voice, in 2017. My son Craig helped me realize the power of having a voice and using it. My solo podcast episodes are about some aspect of being a pharmacist, a voice actor, a pharmacist podcaster, or my career transition from pharmacist to voice actor and podcast host. My interview shows feature a variety of people who use their voices to advocate for something, educate in some way, or entertain, so that my listeners are inspired to use their voices too. Again, this is Kim Newlove from the Pharmacists Voice podcast, which you can find at thepharmacistvoice.com. Thanks for everything you do for podcasters everywhere, Dave, and happy podcasting, everyone.
Thank you, Kim. We've got more insights coming right after this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hey, Dave. This is Eric Alton Glenn Hilliard, and I just have a real quick response to your question of the month. Before I get into that, let's get the shameless self-promotion out of the way. I am the host of White Collared, which is a retrospective commentary on the now retired USA Network television series White Collar, and co-host of the Steel Watching podcast, which is two fans, one old, one young. I'm the old, talking about one of our favorite near-classic TV shows, Remington Steele. And you can find those two podcasts at either www.whitecollarledpc.com or Steel Watching at www.steelwatching.com, respectively. Now, as to the question of the month, I really don't look at the running time of an episode of a podcast. It's not really a big concern to me because I have a pause button and I know how to use it. If I'm listening to a show and I get distracted or called away for something and I can't finish it, it's not a problem. I've downloaded it. I can carry it with me wherever I go. It's going to be there when I come back to it at the same place I left it, which is, of course, one of the great things about podcasting. So there you have it, Dave. It doesn't bother me one way or the other what the length of the show is because I'm going to get to it all eventually anyway. So thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I often have over 100 podcasts in my queue waiting for me to come click play.
Hi, Dave. This is Sarah Clark from the Kind Leadership Challenge podcast, where I empower leaders to heal their organizations in 10 minutes or less. So you might guess my answer to the question of the month is 10 minutes or less, right? Wrong. My answer is that a podcast should be as short as possible to deliver on its promise and almost as long as is enjoyable to listen to. You want to be left wanting a little more, after all. The Kind Leadership Challenge isn't actually my first podcast. For almost a decade, I've been a co-host on Zilch, a Monkeys podcast, the first and largest podcast in the world about the Prefab Four.
Excuse me, I have to say this here. Mr. Bobalina, Mr. Bob Bobalina.
2 hours is not an uncommon episode length for that podcast, and we've had a few monster shows that are over 3 hours. But Zilch Nation, they love every minute of it, because for as long as the show lasts, they get to spend time with their favorite childhood band. And if life gets in the way and we can't put out an episode for a little longer than usual, they've got a backlog of almost 200 episodes to listen to, most of which are pretty evergreen. We are talking about a 55-year-old band, after all. But when I began planning the Kind Leadership Challenge, my experience co-producing Zilch left me with, well, a challenge. I knew that I couldn't sustainably put out a second podcast like Zilch on a regular schedule, certainly not doing it on my own. But I also knew that I had the skills and experience to create an informative podcast that folks would listen to. Then one morning on the drive to work, I was listening to the $100 MBA podcast by the awesome Omar Zenhom, and it hit me. He was providing great value on entrepreneurship every weekday morning in a tightly scripted few minutes, and I often found his little nuggets much more valuable than longer shows on the topic. So why couldn't I share my leadership advice in a similar format? After some tweaks and beta testing with my audience, the Kind Leadership Challenge was born. I can produce it every week without burning out. People get a quick Monday morning takeaway to implement that week. And if I have to skip a week because I'm traveling or overscheduled, I can now put a classic episode or a recent guest appearance into the feed. The cool thing about podcasting is that the format can serve the content, not the other way around. Now, if you'll excuse me, looks like I've got a 9-minute episode from the next Big Idea Daily to listen to, and then 6 hours re-listening to Part 5 of Hardcore History's Pacific War series. And both those shows, they're the perfect length. Till next month, this is Sarah Clark from the Kind Leadership Challenge podcast, and you can give it a listen at kindleadershipchallenge.com.
Oh, how fun was that? Here's my thought. I shoot for 10 minutes is about what it takes me to walk around the block, which I do 2 or 3 times a day when it's nice outside. And yet one of my favorite shows is the No Agenda show, and they do a 3-hour show twice a week. And now, why do I do that? Because I just said that's not really my favorite time. It's that good. And I think that's part of it again, is you just can't be boring. That's the key. I listened to another show that's 90 minutes, and they kind of brag about not editing, and they need to, because I'm ready to unsubscribe. That, or they just need to change the name of the show to Troubleshooting with Chuck and John. York brought up a great point. When I first started the School of Podcasting, everybody said, hey, it needs to be longer because they listened in their commute. And if you can kind of be consistent in length, it does help. I did find some shows that had really short episodes, but they also had really long ones. And I was looking for one with really short episodes, and they kind of mixed and matched, and that didn't work for me. And from what I heard from what everybody just said, I think we're all in the same situation. Like, Gator loves really long podcasts. So if there are other people like Gator, and there are, they're going to look at a show and go, holy cow, that's not long enough. I remember one of my first clients was Judy from Farm and Wife, and she turned in her first episode, and I was like, wow, this is really good, Judy, but it's 3 hours long. And she said, yeah, I gave it to my kind of focus group, and they all said the same thing, and that is, of course, it's too short, because these were the people that are on those tractors that are out plowing the field, and she said those tractors run on their own. They're just there to turn it when they get to the end of the row. So they were like, hey, that was a cool little snack. Got another one? So it really depends on your audience, and it sounds like your audience depends on what they're doing. So if you want more Dave, but not in a long format, check out podcastconsultant.com. The show is called Your Podcast Consultant, and it's typically 9 minutes or less. Why 9 minutes or less? Because I timed how long it takes Jimmy Fallon on The Tonight Show to go to a commercial. So there's that. The podcast rodeo show, where I grab a random podcast and see how long I can hang on, is typically 10 to 15 minutes. It's really just me looking at what kind of first impression are you doing, and then it's just me. It's a reaction video, except it's audio, to a generic podcast. You can find that at podcastrodeoshow.com. If you like a longer show about podcasting, check out Ask the Podcast Coach, where you can get free podcasting advice every Saturday. We record at 10:30 Eastern Standard Time on Saturday mornings, 10:30 to noon. And so that is a 90-minute show. Now, I do edit out some things a little bit. I know today's episode was about an hour and 17 minutes. And here's why. We got done about 10 minutes early, and I didn't have anything else. And I could have sat there and talked about French toast recipes and, that rascal of a cat, Mr. Whiskers. Yeah, we're just like, yeah, we're done. We're out of content. And so we hit it and quit it, for the immortal words of James Brown. And the quote that Gator was looking for is, there is no such thing as too long, only too boring. And that is from the fabulous Valerie Geller from the book Beyond Powerful Radio. So what does this mean? What does it mean? The double rainbow. What does it mean? It means we kind of obsess over, should I do a 10-minute show, a 30-minute show? I think it boils back to, how long does it need to be? And if we go back, to my buddy, really the bottom line, tell him, Glenn.
Don't be boring.
Yeah, don't be boring. And if you ask Tom Webster, I forget what conference he said this one, how long should your episode be? Shorter than your last one. Now, we've heard how some people won't listen to short shows, but the point there is, I sometimes, when I do Your Podcast Consultant, it's the same topic that I cover here in 9 minutes. And Sarah mentioned how she was listening to a show that was a scripted 9 minutes, meaning it was chock full of info, and it was an amazing show, even though it was short. So length does not equal quality. In the same way that I see people like, I've been podcasting for 3 years, so I should monetize now. monetization is not based on length either. It's based on audience size. But making a shorter show actually sometimes can make it better. It's kind of like listening to whoever your favorite band and they put out a greatest hits. Like every song is amazing because you've cut out all the fluff. And that's one of the challenges of a short show is you have to figure out, what am I really trying to say? What do I really want the listener to walk away with? If you put that under a time constraint, it's actually, in a way, a weird, fun challenge because you have to figure out what's the most important stuff. Now, obviously, a podcast can be any length that you want. It is your show.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so I also think there are many times when we pick a schedule and then try to get our life to fit into it, that leads to a lot of burnout. A better thing to do is to record a few episodes. And again, you're probably going to delete those because it's just you practicing, but you need to know how long is it going to take to make an episode, and then figure out, okay, that took me 10 hours to do that one episode. Do I have 10 hours a week to do a podcast? And you look at your life and go, let's see, soccer practice, softball practice, 2 jobs, and a spouse. No, actually, I don't have 10 hours a week to do a podcast, which means you're either going to shrink down the episode because that will shrink down the time it takes to make it, or you hire it out, or maybe you go, but I do have 10 hours every 2 weeks. You could do that. That is much more of a work-life balance when you try to fit the podcast into your life instead of your life into your podcast. Because for the record, your life's much more important than your podcast. So keep that in mind. I want to give a shout out to Mark Vignette. I don't, it's so weird because usually Mark is a guy that answers every question, and maybe he didn't answer this one because it was own. And, there's a rumor that if you answer your own question of the month, you go blind. But he does the History of North America podcast, and you can find that at markvignette.com. Everybody's links that you mentioned will be out in the show notes, and that will be out at schoolofpodcasting.com/876. My last bit of advice today, I don't want to bring the party down, but I say this all the time when people are like, hey, I need to practice with my equipment. And I always say, go interview your parents, interview your kids if you have any. And in 2019, I was hanging out with my uncle, who at that point was 93-ish, something like that. And I thought, man, because the cool thing about my mom's side of the family is everybody keeps their marbles like sharp as a tack. And I thought I really should get a phone or something here and just have him talk. He was a World War I vet. He could tell me things about my mom that I didn't know, all sorts of interesting things. And I was like, yeah, I need to do that someday. Well, that someday has come and gone, as unfortunately at the age of 98, he passed away last week. So I just say to you, even if you're not going to make a podcast, go record your parents, your uncles, your aunts, your kids in one way or another. I recorded my grandpa on my dad's side reading the Christmas story. And every year we listen to that and cry. It's a great time. So these are things you're going to wish you had done later. So time and life is short. Don't put it off. And if you're a person with great things in your head, don't take them to the grave with you. Again, I don't want to bring the party down, but life is short. And speaking of life and trying to make it longer, I have started, this is not a podcasting thing, but if you're interested, if you're like me, I've lost 7 pounds this year. So I'm not like doing the 10 pounds in 10 minutes kind of thing, but I am a little more focused. I have an accountability group. It's absolutely free. There is no catch here. And if you go to monthlychallenge.fit, if you're a person that could use to lose a little weight, that's what we do over there. We cheer each other on. We have a little Biggest Loser competition. It works on both an Android app or a iOS app, and it's just a Slack group if you're wondering like how do you do it? It's a Slack group. And if you are a person that needs to lose some weight, check that out. It's been a lot of fun. Again, the website monthlychallenge.fit. And if you're new to the show, next week we're going to be talking about, I went out looking for new podcasts and I found some things that were disturbing and some things that were encouraging. But here's just a quick sample of one of the topics I'll be talking about, because everything you're about to hear is wrong.
And leave a rating for the show. It helps amazing people like you find the show.
Please, would you give this a 5-star rating and a review wherever you listen to this show, just so that we can help people know that we're back.
Doing so helps expose even more people to the incredibly helpful content.
Please, please, please leave us a review. It really does help us get into the ears.
Please don't forget to rate, review, subscribe.
Don't forget to leave us a 5-star rating and a review.
Rate and review the show on your podcasting app.
And don't forget to rate and review them.
If you liked this episode, please leave a review at your favorite podcast outlet to help others discover this podcast.
And as always, rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast, as it truly helps the message reach somebody who might need to hear it today.
It helps amazing people like you find the podcast.
And I'll explain why that is not true in a future episode. Now, if you are new to the show and you are not following the show, it's super easy. schoolofpodcasting.com/follow, and you can listen in many of the popular apps. And of course, that's just one of the few things you can do out at schoolofpodcasting.com. You can sign up for the newsletter. You can follow the show. You can look at our gear guide. You can look at our affiliate links. And of course, sign up for the School of Podcasting community. Simply go to schoolofpodcasting.com/listener, and I will see you on the inside. Until next week, thanks so much for listening. Take care. God bless. Class is dismissed. Go to podcastconsultant.com. The show is called Your Podcast. It's easy for me to say. And after you hear this, you're going to go, of course that was the answer. Answer? Yes, it's the answer. I've also got, and sometimes when you put that under a mama.